What was it that first brought you to the city of Troy when you moved here?
Well, that would have been about 1963, and we were just a young family, and we were looking for a home that we could afford. And we wanted to be out in the country. My wife is a country girl, southeastern Ohio, and lived in a small town there, and I always liked the country, even though I was a city boy from Detroit. Yeah.
And how did you first get involved with the city?
Well, working and in my job, and as eventually around probably 1965, 1966, I met some other folks that were trying to get things done in the city, get roads paved and get sewer lines in and take care of the water in the ditches, and we kind of started growing together as friends, and some lived in one part of town and others lived in others, and the next thing we know, we're forming homeowners associations and trying to get the city to do some things that we felt needed to be done, and so that kind of got us kind of birds of a feather involved in what we needed to do in the community, and it seemed as though we needed to have numbers in order to get it done at that time, because the city had all kinds of problems and issues to deal with. So, yeah.
Tell me about your role as school bond chairman.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know you knew about that.
We know everything.
And I can't recall who the director or the board of the president of the school district was at that time, but I got a call asking me if I'd be interested in serving on that committee and maybe being the chairman of it, and I said I would, and we did what we could to pass the school bond, and the next thing you know, things got done, and they started building the schools and doing the things that they promised. So yeah, it was just it was a request that I had to see if I would be interested in doing that, and at the time it just seemed like it was something that, with young children especially, I think it was something that I felt that probably would be a good thing to start doing, getting involved with the schools and that.
How many schools were already built when that started, do you remember?
Oh, I don't know how many. I know that I think we built maybe, the school district built maybe a couple schools, maybe 3, as a result of that bond issue. And there were some other things, expansions that went on. I really, as much as I was interested in the schools, I was more interested in some of the problems that the city was having. And so my wife pretty much kind of watched the school issues. I was kind of going in a different direction, but I did enjoy that, come to think about it. Haven't thought about it years. Yeah.
What was it that made you decide to run for city council?
The city had a lot of issues. There was drainage ditches, there was mosquitoes in the summertime. Most of the roads were gravel. It was country. Mm-hmm. And yet it was also on the cusp of becoming a city. There was a lot of developers, a lot of the financial interests in the community that had ideas that they were fostering. And some of us, by this time, this homeowners association groups were starting to, get members in the different subdivisions and that, and we started talking amongst ourselves. And it became apparent that the community, the people in the community, did not want to see some of the ideas develop that were being fostered at City Hall. And we also felt that they were more or less, it was a pretty arrogant bunch up there. I mean, that was from our opinion at the time, probably no more so than anybody else, but at the time we thought they were pretty arrogant. And so one evening up at City Hall with Carlos Lynch, we decided that really we should run for City Council if we expected to change anything. And so on the flip of a coin, like I said, I lost the toss because I wasn't really all that keen on becoming a city councilman, or commissioner as they were called back then. But I lost the toss, and I ran, and that started the whole thing rolling. Yeah.
How much did your first campaign cost you?
My first campaign, I think, was like $35.
Amazing.
It was, most of the money came from the local churches. The local pastors and priests took a collection, and I think they gave me 25 of it, and I put 10 of my own. And but I was pretty resourceful and got around to everybody. I actually walked the neighborhoods in nearly every subdivision in the city and knocked on the doors. Sometimes my kids went with me. Sometimes my wife, Aggie, went along just to, be with the kids. And so we would be out together on a Saturday or Sunday. And I talked to everybody in the community I could possibly talk to. And I think that was really the reason I got elected, because, people wanted somebody to hear what they had to say. So.
What years were you on the city commission, and what was the town like?
My first election was 1967. It was April, I think, that year, and the community was pretty well 35 square miles of Troy. It was a grid with miles, Big Beaver, Waddles, different ones, and then going east and west. So it was both laid out on a grid, and most of it was country. There were subdivisions that were going up here and there, and there was, at the time, there was strip zoning starting on Rochester Road. And there were some of us in the city that just felt that this community could be better than that. That, it was good to have commerce, but on the other hand, it was also good to control it in some way, that it was where you wanted it, and there wasn't too much of it, so you'd have empty store buildings in 5 or 10 years because of the new areas that were opening up. We really wanted to protect it. There was a mall at 14 Mile Road and the Stevenson Highway. I think it was called the Oakland Mall or something. And at that time, those stores, I went and talked to people there, were just barely surviving. And yet there were developers who were already wanting to build new malls in the city, and at a time when they were barely surviving further south at the Oakland Mall. And so we were thinking about these things and thinking, we can be better than that. We can build a community where people have the services, they have the support that they need. And yet, it isn't like it has been in the past, where these communities are basically taken advantage of by the developers, the builders that are there, make their money, and 6 months later, a year later, they leave, only to redo the same thing somewhere else, and then the area goes downhill. We did not want to see Troy become a community where the people could not come in, build a home, and make a lifetime, stay here for a lifetime. Yeah, so we had ideals. So.
When you were a freshman commissioner, you backed Jewel Famularo, Carlos Lynch, and Pete Toucher to run, and they won. Why did you throw your support behind this team, and did you think they had a good chance of winning?
Well, at the time, I have to go back a year before that. When I ran for the city council, I was a single member. And the group that was there was pretty much entrenched. They had lived in the city for quite a while, and maybe for generations. I didn't know, and they were pretty much set on doing things a certain way, and they were basically what I'd call pro-development. Now that isn't a bad word, but at the time it seemed like it was a word. It was an idea or a philosophy that really wasn't going to be good for the city's long-term future. And so I tried several things on the city council. I brought up issues that I thought were important, and basically I couldn't get anywhere because I didn't have the votes to get anywhere with them. And finally, as the year wore on, I realized that it was either I had to get out and try to get some changes, and there was an election coming up where the mayor as well as 2 councilmen were up, and I thought this was it. If there was going to be an opportunity to make a change in the city, this was going to have to be it. And so I talked to Pete Toucher about it, and I talked to Carlos Lynch. Pete was involved in the Homeowners Association on the west side. Carlos was still involved in his over near Long Lake, and then somebody brought in the name of Jules Famularo. It may have, in fact, it might have been Tony Pilato. I don't recall exactly who brought Jules in, and so the 3 of us went over and interviewed Jules. we wanted to find out, first of all, who he was and what he was like. And Jules was more of a senior. He was probably 20 years older than the rest of us, maybe 15, 20 years older. And he was a very nice gentleman, honest. We could see he was honest. And he was, what I would call moderate. He had ideas about development, and yet he was pro-business as well. And we thought that he might be interested, and he was. He was interested in running. He wasn't sure they would get elected, but once the decision was made, and that was probably in November of '67. Then the next 4 months, we really worked very hard. And like I said, Gene Spellman was a friend of ours, and Gene worked for GM, and he was very good at advertising and sales promotion kind of work. And so he created this FLT, Famularo, Lynch, and Taucher idea, instead of BLT, FLT, and we put out brochures. I wrote letters to the editor. We went out and we talked to the homeowners associations and the councils around the city and explained to them what we were concerned about, the issues that we felt that it was important to get the city to do, and why it was necessary to get the changes to come about. And I think people caught the fire, because they won handily in that election, all three. And then all of a sudden, I was a senior member of a majority of 4. And that, of course, was a good feeling, because we felt from that point on we could in fact get some things done, which we did. Yeah.
Now tell us about your talk-ins with residents.
Well, there was a time when the city was just, like I said, you had some friction going on between the homeowners group now that controlled the city and the administration, who was really doing the daily work in the community. They were on the front lines, so to speak, but yet a lot of people in the community felt like they were not responsive. You have that sort of thing. I imagine you'll have that in any community at any given time. But at that particular time, there was probably so many issues going on that the community, the people in the city government were working on, that some things just were not being taken care of, and a lot of people were being flipped off. And so I just decided that we needed an ombudsman, somebody who really was neutral and not really the council necessarily, but somebody that was neutral. Well, we couldn't get that done. We'd have to hire somebody. So it was decided that we would go ahead and bring let the councilman come in on a Tuesday or Wednesday night, I don't recall, and advertise and let people come in and vent their emotions and their thoughts and their feelings and their concerns. And if they had any particular complaints, the city manager would be advised of it, and the city could take care of it, and things would get done. And so we did start this, and it was a good thing. I think if it did anything, it accomplished probably it allowed people to talk as much as they wanted to. They come in, sometimes spend a half an hour telling you what they wanted to tell you, and sometimes it was just there would be nothing you could do about it. But the fact that they could get it off their chest, and you'd let them know that that's about all we're going to be able to do, because there's no money for this project, or there's nobody in the city right now that can handle that sort of thing, because we're still starting out. Mm-hmm. But it was a good thing for the community, and I think people felt very good about that. Yeah. So it did work. It did work to quite an extent, I think.
And sometimes they just want to know that they're heard.
Exactly. And I think that that's an important part of government.
How did the Planning Commission get formed in 1967?
There were appointments that were made, and it was really to try to decide whether what we were going to be, and had to do with the master plan. It had to do with whether or not we were going to zone property back. There was a lot of property on the mile roads that had already become commercial. Some of it had become commercial, and it was there for the waiting. any developer wanted to come in if under the right conditions, and they could zone it, and the next thing we'd know, we'd have strip zoning on all the quadrants and all the highways around the city, and we just did not want to do that. And of course, the argument against that was, well, if you don't have commercial there, nobody's going to build a house, and that was a concern that we had too, but we also realized that that wasn't necessarily true. And we had to kind of move ahead and do what we thought was right and not worry about that. If people weren't going to move there, then we'd do something else. We'd put gardens in, or we'd find another way to use the property. But we did not want strip zoning. We did not want gas stations on every corner. And so we had we created a policy on that. I don't remember if we passed the law on the number of gas stations in the community, but we certainly did have a policy on the number we were going to allow to come in there. And we did not want them on 4 corners. We didn't even want them on 2 corners. And so that was another issue, along with the strip zoning. So. And then we thought that probably it would be a good idea really to have development in certain areas of the community, right, and done in a quality way, and plenty of parking, and we wanted the parking issue studied. We wanted the issue of the corridors, 16-mile road studied. I haven't thought about these issues in years, but yeah, it was more or less along those lines. Yeah.
Do you remember the planning director, first George Peak and then Larry Kiesling?
Yes, I do. I remember George Peak. Yeah, he's a big fella, if I remember right. I'm just kind of reaching back. Yes, I do. And I have to tell you that there was a lot of friction between the city council and the city administration. I felt bad about it in later years, especially with the city manager. Paul was his name? Paul York. And none of us knew that Paul was seriously ill at the time, and so he really took a lot of pressure. He had a lot of pressure on him, and later after he died, I really felt quite bad about that. And not that it would have been possible to change anything like that, but I think in a way the rhetoric could have been probably reduced a little bit, and made it a little bit easier for him if we had known. But you don't know these things, so you just move ahead. But at the time, it was like those guys against us. It was a very adversarial relationship. I think the people in the city government felt that the city council probably was way off base, and I know that the people on the city council felt, well, the city government was off base. Where the buck stopped. And we really had certain things that we wanted, and we didn't want resistance. We wanted to get it done. And now when I look back on it, I think that probably it did finally, start to gel together when Gerstenegger came online. I think he realized that he was a little more diplomatic too, whereas Paul was kind of quiet. He was an introvert, in many ways, and so this was hard on him, If you like to get in there and gravel with everybody, then it's a little easier. But when you're not of that nature, and Paul wasn't, he was just a gentleman. So, how
did council go about choosing Frank Gerstenegger?
We had sent out letters. I think the city did that, and possibly the mayor. I don't recall exactly. And we've got several candidates, and they did come in, and the city council interviewed them. And when we got Frank in there, we kind of all liked Frank. He is a small town boy, and he had a kind of a fresh appearance, and was kind of easy to talk to, and understood that we were on the cusp of growth, and we had a lot of controversial issues we were dealing with, and we needed to have that back and forth discussion, and we didn't want anybody digging their heels in. We wanted these issues to be brought on the table, and we wanted to talk about them, and then everybody as a community do what was best for the city. It wasn't them against us, and so I think Frank understood that very well, and he was pretty jovial, and the thing I liked about Frank is he stood up for his people. He was pretty good. I could tell that right off the bat. He was He was going to be he would be good. He would stand up for his people and make sure that you know, they were taken care of, and that the city's position was well understood if there was real opposition to something we were doing, and we would get a chance to understand that. And that, I think that was important. I think that, you know, in order to get to go and accomplish anything, you really need to have both sides. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it shouldn't be one-sided at all. We didn't want that either, so it worked out quite well.
Was special assessments one of the big issues going on at the time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was, and I'll have to think hard in order to remember all the details of it, but special assessment districts were kind of controversial. Yeah. I wish I could give you some details out of it, but I really
Did you get it changed, the payment structure for
We
that?
did, yes. When there was when there was roads coming in, or when there were sewer lines, especially in the older city, part of the city, just west of Rochester Road, you know, some of the eastern part of the community, there was still gravel roads here, and the sewers were not always in. The water lines were not in. There was people that were still on wells. Mm. And when these districts started being formed in order to get sewer work done, to get road work done and that sort of thing, really the sewers were going in first and the water lines, then it became apparent that a lot of the seniors especially were being affected by this. And at the time, the policy was that you paid in cash, you paid in full for the work. And you know, I imagine some people went to the bank and borrowed the money, but there are a lot of people who couldn't, and they were really in their 70s and 80s. And like I said, I walked around the community quite a bit, talked to a lot of people in every area, and I found that a lot of these people, that was their big concern. They were going to be driven out of their home because of the assessment, having to pay $10,000 or $15,000 for a sewer line running across the front of their property. They had a septic tank. I mean, from their standpoint, I don't need it. Right. And I got water back there. What do I need a city water for? I've got a well. It's been here for years, and it's fine. And so I presented that to the city, and in fact, I think I presented that before I even served on the city council. And the community was resistant. And again, going back to your earlier question about why did I run, the reason I ran and the reason that Carlos Lynch and the others decided to run was because we felt that the buck stopped with the city council. They made the decisions in the community, and they weren't willing to make them. They did not want to make hard decisions, and they did not want to, sometimes they don't want to make any decisions at all because they just didn't feel like it. And when things did need to be done, they needed to be addressed, and if they weren't addressed then, at least put on some kind of schedule where they would be in the future. And you understood that they were going to be, and there was some kind of schedule for it, and it was anticipated, and people could realize that. Sometimes that's all it takes, is for people to know, I can't do it now, but I certainly can do it in a year or 2 or 3 years. We'll allocate the money, and by golly, we'll get it done for you, you know. And by the way, not only in special assessment districts, but also in the backyard drainage. A lot of the new subdivisions were going in, and we were not requiring the developer to drain the property properly. And these were large developments. And finally, and fences were going up, and people were being flooded out. And we finally just decided that we couldn't have that. And so we went back in and forced the city, actually, we went ahead and paid for the modification of rear yards in order to get that drainage under control, and then passed policies where the developers that came in had to take care of the rear yard drainage. No fences were allowed. Culverts were going to be put in, underground drainage would be put in, and it would be put in before any fences were there. There would be final grading, and then those once that all of that was in there, and then fences could go up then if people wanted to put in fences. But nothing would be done until that time. And so we were grasping issues and problems that the city just had to have addressed. And it was very important. And it was good. We did some good things. Yeah.
And you were on council in probably what was the biggest growth period for Troy ever. What were advantages of being a council member during that time?
I say that probably, I don't know if you'd call them an advantage, but I'd say that the fact was that you had a lot of issues to deal with. And you were at the point, you were kind of on the cusp. If we had ignored the issues of strip zoning, if we had ignored the issues of how many malls, how many shopping centers you want in the community, if you ignored the issues of parking for the buildings that were going to go up, and you did not resolve these issues to the city's and its future's advantage, then you missed everything. You were missing the point. Once the precedents were set, once there was a lot of strip zoning in the community, you would have a difficult time stopping it.
Right.
Because the lawyers would come in and say, well, you've already done it over here, you've done it over there, why can't my client have it? And you had a little bit of that in already, but at least we were in the beginning. And once we decided, we made that choice that we were going to, this community was going to be the way we wanted it to be, as a group, as a community itself, getting feedback from different ones, and also listening to the planning commission here, planning department, on which they were very much aware of what these policies could be and how they could be reinforced and implemented. We just moved along on those issues. Yeah.
Did they draw up the master plan during that time, or was that already in existence?
Actually, they had a master plan when I got on the city council in '67, but it wasn't being implemented.
Okay.
And so what we did is we looked at it, I think in the probably 68, 69, 70 period, and reestablished and reinforced it. And of course, we went to court several times with big companies as well as small, and there were quite a few consent judgments. But basically, we held our ground because we were consistent. And that was the key. We said, look, this is who we are. This is what Troy is going to be. Now, if you want to come here, you come here. If you don't want to and you can't live by those rules, then don't bother, because we don't care. Yeah. It's the communities, I think, that are fearful that if they're going to lose a business, they're going to lose a big development, they're going to lose a housing project, and they'll give away the store and allow certain deviations from their what they know is in the best community's best interest, is really what they're doing is they're selling themselves out. The aesthetics of the community then become affected, because instead of getting quality building accomplished, something that the community, when you drive by, you look at it and say, gee, isn't that a nice building? You get aluminum and you get plastic. Not that that's bad, but on the other hand, if you don't want that to be what your community looks like, you have to make sure that you say so. And we did. When they were putting in the Chrysler project years ago, Chrysler had a developer come in there, and that was a very big project, 1,800 acres of the city of Troy. And I was called by one of the first people that owned up there and said, I want you to come and look at how they're building these houses. And so I went up there and went down to the basement with the fellow. Well, they were shimming the house from one side to the other, 1.5 to 2 inches. The foundation, the header sitting on the foundation was cattywampus. They were not square. And when we went to another couple that were being built in another part of the subdivision, they weren't square. And so I came back and I talked to the building department about it. I said, you guys have got to do a better job. I said, because people are spending money, they're spending thousands of dollars on these homes. This is their life's investment. And I said, these houses they're not going to last. And it was the same way also with Somerset. They were putting clapboard on some of those apartments there when they started building them. And we said, no. You can't expect somebody who's going to come in and buy up this apartment after 5 years tax break that you're getting as the initial builder, and then you're going to sell it to another corporation, or you're going to sell it to yourself in another corporation, and you can't expect another company to come in and repaint this place. They're going to just milk it for whatever it's worth, unless they know that it can't be milked. It's just the way business is done sometimes. And I said, so in order to ensure that we have a community that, it keeps its value and it looks nice into the future, you've got to make sure that you're using good building material and the construction is good and it's right. And we all felt that way, including the city administration. And but we went ahead and charged ahead, and we had all kinds of little controversies, like what was going on up at that development and what this developer was doing and things like that. And we did get involved. We got our hands dirty. We got messy with people that we didn't want to get messy with. But finally, I think people realized that we were really trying to do this for the community. So,
what developments was Sam Frankel working on?
Sam Frankel had the Somerset Mall. And he had the Somerset Park, their apartments there. Really a very nice gentleman. Norm Cohen was one of his partners, and Norm was a great guy. I like Norm, and I like Sam too. And they had, they had great ideas for the community. They had some ideas on the north side of Big Beaver that we didn't particularly care about, and in terms of multiple development. He wanted to go multiple, and we really did not want any more multiple than necessary. The thing about multiple, and I did some studies on this. I was kind of I'm a kind of a scholarly person. I like to read a lot. I read a couple novels a week, and at the time I was doing some research on this, and I was pulling up studies from this city and from that state. And we were looking at the number of children who would normally be in an apartment complex, 1.3, 1.6, whatever it was, and begin to realize that if we didn't control the numbers, and if we did not look at apartments as a service in the community, it wasn't a right to have an apartment there, it was a service. You were providing a form of dwelling for people who were in transit or who didn't want to own a home or couldn't own a home at the present time. You certainly want to be able to take care of people like that. But at the same time, you could not have so many that the schools were being inundated. Because, first of all, the city is affecting how the school district is run.
Right.
You literally are forcing them to raise the taxes or to have new bond issues. You're just literally driving their requirements. And of course, that's happening today, by the way, in Texas with the illegal Hispanics that are coming into Texas and other states. You can see this in a lot of places today, and which the country is going to eventually have to get a hold of. But in Troy at that time, we could see that if we did not at least have make some sense out of how these were going to affect the future of the community, we would really create some real problems for Troy. And so what we did is we basically told Frankel that, and Norm that we didn't want that many apartments. Think of, come back to us and bring something else. Mm-hmm. And basically that's what they wanted. They wanted those duplexes. They wanted the apartments in there, and we just basically held them at arm's length. And I think we held them at arm's length for quite a long time, even after I was off the council. I think it was quite a few years before he finally got and built that extension to the mall, and the crossover and everything, mm-hmm. which I think is just absolutely beautiful. Yeah. It's really very nice. So, part of the zoning thing has to do with what your final expectations are. It has to do with the final results. And if you are serving in a position of councilman, state representative, of a congressman or a U.S. senator, the decisions that you make, you have to see the long-range implications of those. If you can't see that, then you have to look at it and learn about it before you make that decision. And that's my philosophy. It's always been pretty much that way, even if I couldn't articulate it, is that, hey, whatever decision I make, people are going to live with that. And I thought, hey, this is a city. It can have a personality. Look at Birmingham. Look at Farmington. It will have its own personality, and I felt that very strongly about that. And I think most of the people on the council did too. Yeah.
What was your position on parks and open space?
I thought that was a marvelous thing. I thought there should be flowers and and bicycle paths along the interstate. I thought we should put walls up on the interstate all the way through the community in order to keep the noise from the residential areas that we're developing there, and that those walls should be covered with flowers, and there could be bicycle paths through there that people could go from one end to the other. I felt that every square mile in this community should have, you should be able to interact with bicycle paths and walking paths. And in order for people to be able to have their evenings or their days and to move around on and have recreation, I think it's a marvelous thing, and a lot of that knowledge and feeling came really from the experience I had in Canada. I spent a lot of time in Canada with my family. We love to go up there and sail, and they had signs. Walk on the grass, you know. They had walking paths from one area of the city to the other. You could ride a bicycle or a snowmobile, and it was really a marvelous thing. So, yeah, it was pretty neat. So I believed in those things. I think they're just marvelous. Yeah. So.
Do you feel, looking back now, and you look at Troy, had the master plan been followed?
Well, I don't remember the details of the master plan. We actually we thought about actually closing Big Beaver and having a one-way drives around the what we'd call the city center, and that, of course, was not followed. That was a Minoru Yamasaki's suggestion. He was very involved, and we liked his ideas very much. I think that in many ways it has been followed. Certainly Big Beaver Road, we've allowed these corporate headquarters to come in and bring quality construction and facilities into the city, Kresge's and others, and Volkswagen, I guess, and General Motors. And I think that has been a good thing. The residential areas kind of seem the same as they were back then, except there's just more of them. And I'm surprised as I drive through the city to see that there's still so much open land, which is kind of nice in a way. And it tells me that even though the city was a good place to come and to develop and to be a part of as a builder or a developer, people still did not rush up here and just take over. It tells me that there's still a deliberate effort to try to control the development. Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. And I haven't talked to anybody on the city council here in probably 25 years, so yeah, that's just the impression I get. Yeah.
Back in 1969, was it a big deal that Kresge decided to build headquarters in Troy?
The subdivision there, the homeowners did not want it. And we went over there and had meetings with them, showed them what the plan was. They had a speaker there from Kresge's and explained to them that they'd be a good neighbor and there wouldn't be a lot of traffic, and showed them the building, and we went ahead and passed it. There were a few people that dissented in terms of in the community that just felt it wasn't a good thing, but you have that. You just have to get past it. That's all. You always have a little bit of that. It doesn't matter. Nobody's ever going to totally agree on something. Yeah. So, yeah. But it was a good project, and I think that then it opened up the opportunity to look at that area in a different way. You know, what could be. Yeah. You've got an office complex over here. Why can't you have an office complex on the northeast corner? Why can't you have a different type of mall or something? Why do you have to have apartments? So that, in a way, probably hurt Frankel in a way, because this was a little different idea. So, and it was nice to have Kresge's there. That was quite a plum. Yeah. So.
Discuss the open housing ordinance, and what was the mood of the Metro Detroit area after the Detroit riots?
Well, it was, I think the suburbs, of course, are the suburbs. People, it's an escape. It has always been an escape for Detroit. I live in the South, and I have for 27 years, and I have to be honest with you. I've always heard people, act in the North and talk in the North about integration as being something that, or the segregation problems of the South as being a terrible thing. And it was terrible. But I think that the policies and the behavior of the North was even worse. We act like we, hated racial segregation and all the things that that meant. And at the same time, we moved away from any integration whatsoever. And in the South today, everything is integrated. It has been for years. You don't have people moving away because a black person moves into the neighborhood. And of course, 1967, you mentioned the riots. They were terrible, and people still had that fresh on their minds. But here we had young men dying in Vietnam. Many of them were blacks. I don't know what the proportion was, but it was pretty high. And I thought to myself, I'd like to really know how the people in the community feel about this issue. And so 2 weeks before my election, I had written my letter, pretty much my statement that I wanted to make at the council meeting, and I read it and then gave it to the newspapers, and it never showed up that week in the paper. Oh. And so finally I called Pete, not Pete Toucher, but what's his name at the Royal Oak Tribune? Gosh, I'll think of it. One of the reporters there at the Tribune and Royal Oak paper, and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, I came out with a very controversial issue." He said, "Why did you do that?" And I said, "Because I'd like to know how people feel, and I want them to know how I feel about the issue." He said, "Well, you may not get elected." And I said, "Well, it's their choice." I said, "I feel that way." And so the next Monday, I chastised the papers. I said, "You have no right to deny this information from the community. I'm going to redistribute the information again, and you'll have it. And I'd like to see it in the papers." I said, "If people don't like it, that's fine." And they did. They put it in the paper, which even appeared in the Detroit News. And I got reelected by landslide. I had some letters from people that felt that it was an issue that didn't need to be brought up. Even the city council at that time did not want to talk about it publicly. And we did go behind closed doors and discuss it at one meeting. And finally I just said, I don't think that this is an issue. It needs to be behind closed doors. I think it needs to be discussed publicly, and that's how I feel, and people can vote for it or not. Well, we didn't pass any laws, but what we did do is we did pass a resolution that basically said the community was a community that fostered a variety of ideas and people, and that anybody wanted to move here should, that kind of thing. So anyway, I guess I was breaking new ground. Yeah. Yeah. So, but I thought it was important. It's a moral issue to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there were not a lot of moral issues in the city. So, yeah.
Tell me about the situation of builders and contractors inflating their bids in Troy.
That started, that was part of why I had to help Jules and Pete and Carlos Lynch become elected. That started about mid-year and in the summer of '67. And what was happening is I was watching the bids that were coming in, and the city was accepting bids that seemed to be getting higher and higher. And I had a friend that worked for the Association of Underground Contractors. And I called him, and of course, he did not want his name used, and I promised I wouldn't use his name. But I called him and I asked him, "What is going on?" And he said, "About what?" And I said, "The bids in Troy," are getting higher and higher. He says, "You guys got a problem out there." And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Our guys are standing there for hours at a time waiting for your inspectors to come." He said, "The water's filling the ditch. We got to send for a pump and bring equipment in." He said, "It's going on all over the city." And I said, "Is that the only reason?" He said, "Well, that's one of them." And I said, "What else is going on?" He said, "Well, I can't talk about that." So, I couldn't get him to talk about it. I didn't refuse that. And then a week or two later, I got a call from somebody in Madison Heights, some Italian gentleman who wanted to meet me privately. And I said, "I can't do that. I can't meet with you privately. I can bring a few people from the city council with me. I can bring the city engineers with me." He said, "Well, I don't want to do that." And I thought, well, okay, this is now it's getting frustrating. And so what I did is I did my own study. I figured if I can show them the facts that the cost of underground equipment, pea gravel, clay pipes, metal pipes, cement pipes, gravel, the things that make up the cost of doing business, your fixed cost and your variable cost. If I could show the City Council that, in fact, there was no justification for these increases, then they'd have to deal with it, because they weren't listening to me. And that, of course, was becoming frustrating. So I did my study. And I presented it to the City Council and gave copies to the newspapers. And basically, all we could show was about a 3.5% increase over the last 2 years. Although the prices of the quotes had gone up 40 and 50%. Ultimately, in the end, well, what happened in the ensuing time between that and the time that it pretty much was borne out that I was right, was that the City Council fought it tooth and nail. And basically I was being accused of being grandstanding and doing things like that, and which is, par for the course. And nothing was really getting done. And finally, when I got Jules and Pete and Carl in there, it became possible then to follow up on this and ask the city, what was going on. And we got their reports and basically was saying, well, they didn't see a problem. This is just the normal course of doing business. Prices were going up everywhere. Well, they weren't. So what eventually happened was that we did have a hearing. The contractors came in and talked. We had them come in also to a private, not a private meeting, but a meeting that the city held in an office. Mm-hmm. And they came in and talked there. And what it came down to was, look, they felt that our standards were gold-plated. Well, that wasn't an issue. Our standards were what they were. If that raises the price, then we'll have to deal with that. They put a Troy factor in because of the delays and other things that were going on. Okay, we can do something about that. And there was, a few other issues. Who knows what they were? Because nobody really wanted to hurt their position here. Right. Builders, developers, people like that. And so what happened was that some of these jobs that were already in process started coming in, and the final billing came in, all of a sudden the savings was 25, 30, 40% less than what they were bid on. And that just basically, confirmed to me that when these districts were getting back money, people had already paid in some cases, and the money was now coming back to them in the form of a check that, okay, and that's all I wanted to do, was get this thing straightened out. Because after all, it's the taxpayers that are footing the bill for that. Mm-hmm. The city is just passing it through. Right. And so that was important. That was a very important issue, and I took a lot of heat on that. And but I stood my ground, and the guys, when they got elected, I think they were wondering whether I was crazy or not, but it finally worked out. Yeah.
Was there a task force created between the building department and the Builders Association? Was that part of that?
A what?
A task force?
I don't remember that, but there could have been it could have been. I think there was some kind of committee that was set up to try to communicate and to work that out. Yes, I think you may be right on that. Yeah.
Why did Mayor Jules Famularo resign at a 1971 meeting?
Well, there had to do with, gosh, I have to reach back on that one.
Was it you were on the council?
I was on the council, and he was upset with me about some particular issue. I don't remember it completely, but I think he was kind of upset with me on a particular issue, and I told him, I said, he said, well, I'm going to resign if I can't do this or that, and I told him, I said, go ahead and do it. But I don't remember the details of it. I have to go back and refresh my mind, maybe with the minutes or something. But I do, and of course, I didn't want him to resign any more than anything else. I think, occasionally, like Pete Toucher and I occasionally got into loggerheads, I'd call it. And even Carlos Lynch and I have been friends for many years. Got into loggerheads occasionally. We'd disagree on something. He'd be mad at me for a week or two, and then he'd get over it. But I felt with Jules, I think I'm beginning to realize some of this. I told Jewel at that time, I said, Jewel, we have the power right now. If you knuckle under, you either are for us accomplishing certain goals or you're not. If you're not, resign. I said, I don't care. And he said, well, you know, you can't have absolute power. And I said, I don't want absolute power. I want to know that we've got a goal and that we're working towards it. That's what I want. I'm not a politician. And I think Jules just got so mad at me, he just got frustrated. And that really, in a way, that changed things a little bit on the city council. We were a little bit estranged, even though we got along. After that, we were a little bit estranged, and I felt bad about that. Yeah, I think I'm fairly soft-hearted, you know. I hate to really be on the outs with anybody. Mm-hmm. I go out of my way to avoid it. And I do avoid, that's part of my personality. My wife will say, you go out of your way to avoid any controversy or anything. I say, yeah, I do, but I didn't when I was on that city council, mm-hmm. you know, so.
You back tough disclosure laws for those in political office. Did that stem from the state investigation of former councilman and at the time Lieutenant Governor James Damon and City Attorney Stanley Burke?
Well, no, because I didn't even know Burke was involved in any of this. Yeah, it was actually something that I felt was important. That would have probably been 1971, 72, and things in Washington. I was watching what was going on in Washington, and also realizing that there was a lot of favors going on in the community. The guys, the builders, the developers would come in and they'd just slap you on the back. And you could see that there's, especially with Damon and with, there was another gentleman, I can't remember his name, was on the council, that basically, you know, whatever the builders wanted, whatever the developers wanted, whatever modifications, lightening of rules and regulations they wanted, slap on the back, got it done. And I thought to myself, you know, you can't do business that way. You gotta be above board, especially when you're elected, especially when you're elected. Now, if you're in private business and you want to do business that way, that's your business. You know, it's between two people. But when you are an elected representative of the people, they're involved. They're part of it. And not only that, but they look up to you. They look up to you. That is the most important thing that you have going for you, is the fact that they either admire you or they respect you, and that you have their confidence. And so I felt that it was important, especially with all the development that was going on early on, that we have an open disclosure law and a conflict of interest law here. And the funny thing about it, I wrote the law, I actually wrote it, and then it was, and we were told by the city attorney that it would be illegal. The state wouldn't even honor it. I said, I really don't care. Mm-hmm. You know, if they don't honor it, they can take us to court. But we're going to have it. And the rest of the guys in the council felt it was a good thing as well. But you know what? We couldn't get it passed. The council didn't pass it. Mm-hmm. It failed. And so what we did is we went out and got a petition drive. And then it passed 9-1. And so we did get it on the thing. But the funny part about that law was that when we put it on the ballot, Burke, the attorney, got a hold of it, and he made changes to it before it was actually put on the ballot and took the teeth out of it. And after I realized, and the funny thing about that is, it's funny how life works. One night I woke up, probably a week or two after that ballot referendum, and it had passed. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and my wife said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going into my file." She said, "Why?" And I said, "I just got a funny feeling about something." I opened the file, and I sat down, and I reread that law the way it had been passed, and 2 or 3 measures, teeth had been pulled out of it, that he pulled out of it. And the next Monday, I went up on the city council, and boy, I just went after him. I said, "What right did you have to pull the teeth out of this deal?" He said, "Well, I would never." I said, "It won't the way it is. It's not worth a plug nickel." So I think the city council, I don't remember the details, and I don't remember just exactly when, but I think the city council then put the new words back into it in order to give it the heft that it actually needed. I didn't want to see people disclosing personal information, but if they were doing business with a developer in town, and they were on the city council, like Jules Famularo was. That's probably one of the reasons that he and I had some problems, was that he was in the insurance business. Well, it turns out he was selling insurance to everybody and his brother. Well, now, when you're dealing with those issues. Are you working for the city or are you working for the developers?
Right.
You can't work for both. And it was the same way with some of the people who were actually in the building department. You know, there were some of them that were good friends and cronies with the builders, and I just thought, you know, that isn't right. So that's how all this came about. And fortunately, we were able to have it, and I think we were probably one of the first cities in the state that had anything like that. So it was a good thing.
Can you share with us about the group that was based in Macomb County but had ownership of land in Troy?
Well, they had, it was the, I'm trying to recall the name of the corporation that they set up there. It was actually people who had served on the city council. There was probably 7 or 8 of them, including the city attorney. And they had, they were good friends, and they were interested in, I guess, seeing that money was made in the community, and that they were, you know, taking advantage of the opportunities that were presented by all this development and growth that was coming in, and especially the land that would be up for sale. And so while in the early years, while I was on the city council, and I was there with, even with during the years at Pete, and after 1969, when 68, when Pete and Famularo and Carl got on, these people were still very influential in the community. Stan Burke was still the city attorney. There were still a couple of other councilmen. Jim Damon that was on the council. And these people were investing in property in the city of Troy. They were taking options on land for $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 an acre that were going to become the complexes for Volkswagen and for these other companies along 16 Mile Road and other areas. And we're talking about land that would go from, they would get an option of 6, 7, 8,000, maybe 10,000 an acre at the top end. That would eventually be worth $250,000 an acre. And they knew it, and they were part of the reason that it was going to become that way. And so while we were getting all this input from the lawyers and from people on the council and the planning commission, that we needed to do this and we needed to do that, and a lot of this stuff seemed logical. They were, and while this stuff was being set in concrete, they were under a false corporation in Macomb County buying up the land or taking options on it and selling it to their developer friends and other things. It was a bad time, and of course, you know, I had no idea that was going on until, you know, the newspapers made it public. A fellow by the name of Reamer Tyson, who was working with the Detroit News, had been an investigative reporter with Newsweek, and he was working with the Detroit News, and the News put him on that deal and basically told him to stay on it until he got what he wanted. And he contacted immediately. I guess he knew that I was somewhat of a renegade on the council. He contacted me immediately and told me what he suspected. And then I brought Carlos Lynch into it because I knew I could trust Carl for sure. And I knew Carl also kept better records than I did. I didn't have room for records in that little house, but I did keep a lot of my stuff. But he had kept everything for the several years that he had been on the council up to that time. It was in his garage. And by the way, somebody tried to burn his garage down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and also somebody tried to kill one of the accountants who was involved with us as well.
Oh, my.
Yeah. They actually sent a hitman to his business, and the guy waited and waited for days till he showed up, and when he finally got discouraged and he went in and saw his secretary, took a gun out, put it to her head, and told her that if, and I can't remember the accountant's name, if he did not shut his mouth, that he would be dead.
Wow.
That's the kind of stuff that was going on.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very serious. This was not, they were not playing games. And at the same period of time, I remember one night coming home from a dinner with my wife and my kids. We had been out with my mom and dad, and we pulled up into the house, and of course it was dark there on Colebrook Street, and went inside, and the phone was ringing, and I answered the phone, and it was Reamer Tyson, and he said, "I've been trying to get you all night." And I said, what's it about? And he says, did you just get in? I said, yeah. And he said, "Are your lights on?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And he said, "Shut them off." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Because," he says, "there's a hit on you." And I said, are you kidding me?" He said, "No." And I said, where's this coming from? He says, I think it's coming from Damon or one of those people on that deal. And I didn't even tell my wife because I figured it would scare the heck out of her. Mm-hmm. But I was very cautious after that. Next morning, I called the governor's office, and Damon was already now lieutenant governor, and I told the governor's secretary, I said, I want somebody, the Republican Party, to call me tomorrow, or call me today. And I got a call, and I said, this is what's going on in Troy. And I kind of described the situation and what has been entailed and how the FBI had been in touch with me. I said, you need to know that your lieutenant governor has got some problems. And I said, you need to fix them. And I said, I'm going to tell you right now, if anything happens to my family or to me, I said, I'm posting a letter, it's going to go to all the newspapers. I said, this thing I'll make sure everyone knows who's involved.
Mm-hmm. When Damon and Burke were exonerated of their charges, was that just because the laws weren't in effect yet?
The laws in Troy really, I don't think, had the teeth in them that was necessary, and the state didn't have a good conflict of interest law. If they had been in Chicago, they would have gone to jail for what they had done. And in fact, that was brought out in the Detroit News, that the state of Illinois had much more stringent conflict of interest laws than Michigan had. And I don't know whether Michigan, since then, I left in '78 when I moved to Texas. I don't know if Texas or if Michigan has done anything, substantive to that, those laws that they had then, but they would have gone to jail otherwise. They just got off because there was nothing there to charge them with because there was nothing on the books.
Right.
Yeah, but they shouldn't have been exonerated. I mean, I wouldn't want to see them go to jail, but my God, they were systematically taking care of themselves, feathering their nest. Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the public's expense, and especially of the people. There were people here who had been in the city for a long time, and they lived on a lot of this land. They owned the land, they had their little shacks, their shotgun houses on them, and they were the people that were being taken advantage of. That wasn't right. If you got another developer that comes in, buys the land, gives them a fair price for it, and they move out, that's one thing. But to come in there privately and I had a couple of people call me. This is what really kind of set me up in a way. A couple of people call me and say, we got an offer on our place. Is there anything going on in the Planning Commission? And I said, well, I can't talk about a lot of this stuff, but there is a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of development in this area and this and that. And I said, why? He said, well, I've just got an offer for $7,000 or $8,000. And I'm saying, well, I can't tell you to sit on your land. Right. And because after all, I said, it's your property. And not only that, I can't give you the information that, we're going to really do this. And if you sit on it for 5 years, you're going to be worth $1 millionaire. You'll be a millionaire or something. I couldn't do that. Because if you do it for one, then you've got to do it for everybody. And you can't do that. And but I was beginning to realize that here they were taking options for $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 on people that had been around for years. They were ready to move away. The traffic was starting to pick up a little bit. Somebody built next to them, and they didn't like the building, or different reasons. And so that was part of what was going on here. They were taking advantage of people who really didn't understand what was taking place. So.
What was the situation when Damon backer Eugene Batur filed a $250,000 slander suit against you for calling him the biggest troublemaker in Troy?
Well, I had gone to a homeowners meeting. I was invited to a homeowner association meeting and asked to talk about the development in the community. And I did talk about it, and I didn't talk about them, but I talked about the development and some of the developers and the way they operated, but I didn't go into detail because for the very reason I wouldn't want to be sued and taken to court over some harassment suit. And I think they just decided that they were going to harass me. And so they did. I didn't even know about the suit until I got a call from the Detroit papers asking me. Oh. I was in Indianapolis and on business with Allison, Detroit Diesel Allison Division. I had a meeting down there, lasted all week, and I got a call from the paper. I think it might have been from the Birmingham paper, saying, what do you want to tell us about the lawsuit? And I said, what lawsuit?
Surprise.
And he said, you don't know you're being sued? And I said, no. They said, you're being sued for $250,000. And I said, well, good. I said, I don't know where they're going to get $250,000, but, you know, more power to them. What's it about? And they you know, read me the information, and I called Aggie, and she called me, and she said, I didn't want to bother you with this. My wife's like that. She's, you know, she just flipped it off. But it was a harassment suit, basically. The developers and the builders, and I think it was probably after I was reelected. I think, you know, they couldn't get me that way, so they were going to figure out another way that they could, you know, give me some problems. So, yeah.
What led to your resignation from council in 1972?
Well, a lot of the issues that were hitting the city. I think, in a way, I was starting to feel as though it was really affecting my family negatively. I had little kids. I couldn't make it to the Little League. I couldn't make it to the flute concerts. I couldn't. The phone rang every night, you know, several times while we were eating dinner, and you know, you didn't have call forwarding, and you didn't have you know, recordings there that you could, you know, ask people to call back. It was starting to affect the family, and it was also starting to affect my job. After all, being on the city council is something that you give your time to, for $10 a week or whatever it was. You know, that's what you were doing. You were doing it because you felt that you could accomplish some good, you know, right, some greater good. And then there was also the issues of the danger. Some of the, you know, the fact that there was people out there that really wanted to, you know, certain things in the city, and I was an obstacle to that. And I felt, well, you know, I had done my part. Mm-hmm. You know, the FBI had spent weeks coming in and out of my house and Carlos Lynch's, and trying to pull information together so they could go after Damon and these other folks. And this was, in a way, kind of traumatic to my wife and to the kids. They were great people. In fact, a couple of the FBI agents went to our church, and I didn't know them, that they were that, until they showed up at the door, and all of a sudden here we were talking about these issues. But it was that sort of thing, and it was also the fact that my wife also was, I think, ready for a change. She's a Southern girl, in a way, and I think she wanted to move further out in the country. And I thought, well, okay, we could do that, you know. Mm-hmm. So we ended up moving up to Clarkston area, over there off of Independence Lake, and it was a nice 5 years that we lived there until we were transferred, you know. So, and the kids, you know, as much as they liked Troy, they liked the lake better. The boys liked to fish, and the girls were, you know, pretty happy out there as well. So, you know, they made a lot of friends.
Why did you recommend Tony Pallotta to fill your seat?
I thought Tony would be a good choice. He had some shortcomings. Tony is a glad-hander. He's, and I don't mean that in an unkind way, but he's very affable, very, you know, outgoing in that. I wasn't sure that was a good thing. I thought there might be a conflict. If he reads this, he'll probably frown, but and that's okay. But at the time, to be honest with you, I wasn't sure Tony would be a good choice. But at the time, I thought probably he'd be the best choice. And I knew he would work well with Carlos Lynch. I know he liked Jules Famularo, or at the time, I guess, yeah, Jules was still there, and he would like and certainly work well with Carlos and the others. And I thought if I went ahead and resigned as opposed to waiting out my term, it would give him an opportunity to have some time on that council. He could be appointed if they chose to appoint him. And I hope they would. I couldn't tell them to do that. That was something they'd have to decide they'd do it themselves, but I was pretty secure in the fact that they might do that. And I thought that that would give him time to establish himself there and let people get to know him and see how his voting record was. It would give him nearly 6 months, maybe a little longer. So it turned out that way. And I have to tell you, personally, I was starting to be affected by chemical depression. I was starting to have episodes of depression that I didn't understand. I didn't even know what it was, but I was starting to be very blue. And this was carrying over into some of the things that were going on in the city council. And, you know, very pessimistic and dim view of the things that were going on, and starting to overreact a little bit. And I didn't know it at the time, but my dad had suffered with you know, what you call depression. And unfortunately, at the time, I started, just shortly after that, after I got off the council, I started becoming, going and getting help. And fortunately, there were some drugs that were coming out that were starting to make a difference in that respect. So, you know, I suffered with it for probably about 10 years, and then finally some very good drugs came out, you know, Prozac and others. And that made a really big difference. But that was part of it too. I think I was at a point where I actually felt that I needed a change. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you have to admire people who serve. On the other hand, you have to absolutely be disgusted with people that serve and serve and serve. Because there is no way in the world that you can actually be objective and positive about what you do for an indefinite period of time. At least I don't think so. I think you get calloused. You see the same people up there, the same groups that are looking for the same favors and information and special requests. And you also get tired of the projects. You get, one thing and another. It kind of gets to you.
You can get burnt out.
Yeah, it's the same old thing. And the hearings have become repetitious. It's, it isn't like you're dealing with world affairs. You're dealing with the mundane. You're dealing with the everyday. And these are important things.
What are you most proud of your time in office?
Well, I think I was a breath of fresh air. I hope I was. And I feel that I was a catalyst that spurred people on to maybe be better than what they would have been, and to stick with the issues. I think Pete Toucher was that way in a lot of ways. Pete was once he decided about something, he stuck to it. He and I disagreed about different things from time to time, but he stuck to it, and I did too. Carlos was pretty much that way. Jules could go back and forth. And that was, how Jules was. He could see things in a different way, probably because of his age. But we were kind of young and, kind of young stallions, and we were just charging ahead. I think I was a catalyst in that respect. I think that I came to the city and became a part of the city government at a time when it needed this, and it needed a focus. It needed to be firm on what it wanted to be as a community. Otherwise, it would have been taken over by the special interest groups. It's how Madison Heights and these other communities become just a haven for cheap builders that build no sidewalks, no parks, no backyards, houses 6 feet together. People invest in those houses, and while they're investing in them and paying on them, they're building more a mile away, and the people that want to sell the earlier homes can't even sell them for what they're worth, because you can buy one cheaper over in the next mile.
Right.
It's not a good situation, and I felt that this was important, that we did something a little different here in the community. I'll give you an example of that. The Oakland Mall, was there, and I talked to people there, as I said earlier, and they're saying, "Geez, we're barely making a living here."
Right.
If they put that mall in up in the North End, they were talking about, then the next thing you know, we're not going to even be able to make a living. This place will shut down. If you put 3 or 4 malls in Troy, and there was actually a time when there was suggestions about maybe 3 or 4 malls.
Wow.
Yeah. So, developers were talking in that way. So I think that being here, I was probably the catalyst. And when I left, I think it was probably a good thing too. I think it was a good thing. The city then had already made these commitments, in a way was starting on a good track, and I think it was a good time for me to be out of there, so the rest of them could then kind of moderate their positions a little bit, and just keep it going. And they did. They seemed like they have. So that's kind of makes me feel good. I don't say I was the one that caused it. I think that I was, there was a lot of people felt this way, but I was the focal point in a way by being the first on the council and then helping the other 3 get elected. All of a sudden I was like that article said, I was the leader. Mm-hmm. So which was amazing, an article. I had no idea anybody would write an article like that. So, yeah. I love this city, though. It's a beautiful city, and people here were always nice to me. So. So had no regrets. I hated to leave, in fact, but when I look back, I thought, I had no regrets. It was really a good experience. Yeah, and you build on all those experiences all your life. Everything you learn. So.
On a lighter note, tell me about your proposal to keep our firefighters fit.
Well, they were all volunteer, and the volunteer fire department was a good thing. There was nothing wrong with that, except you had people in there that were getting big pot bellies. Here we were putting buildings up that were, 10 stories high, starting to do that, and they were all unfit.
Right, how
they were just getting together and playing cards. That's what they were doing. And I just made a decision that, in my own mind, that this was inconsistent. You can't have it. We're beyond that. We're not a small community. We're not just, going to all jump in our cars and go over here and handle this stuff. Now you're getting into skyscrapers. You're getting into a big community, growing community. And so I brought that up. Of course, it really upset a lot of people, especially on the fire department. But I think it was an important move. And they did start doing some things to get the guys in good shape. I didn't want anybody to have a heart attack trying to help somebody out of a building. And that could happen, even in persons in good condition, under the best of conditions. So I felt that was a good thing. It was good for Troy to do it. And of course, the news made a big deal out of it, and the cartoons and everything. But I didn't care. I figured, hey, I don't know if you like me or not. It doesn't matter. I think we need a good fire department in the city, so let's have it, Go exercise, eat less, whatever it takes, so you can go up that ladder without having a heart attack. Right. So anyway.
Do you have any amusing stories about dealing with residents?
Oh, Emily Socha, the sweet woman, and her husband, such a good guy. He was such a decent fellow. They're both really good people. But Emily would come to the council, and she would just chew us up one side and down the other. And of course, I knew she wasn't chewing me out because she loved me. She thought it was the salt of the earth, But and Carlos, she loved Carlos too. And this was part of it too. As you get to the point where you have certain people that come up, and even though hey, they have every right to be there, you get to the point where you've heard the story, you've heard the issue so many times that you really are starting to get despondent. And it's human nature. Right. It isn't that you're evil because you think those thoughts.
Like it's coming before she says it.
Yes, Emily. Or you'd almost sit back in your seat and cringe when she'd come up there. But there were others that did the same thing. But Emily had the city's best interest. She really was outspoken about things that were very important. But you know what? You get to the point where you don't want to hear it, even though it's important. That's why term limits are important, is because when you first get on the city council, the first year or two or three or four, you are just absolutely charged up and ready to go. But then you like I say, you go through that period of, it's almost like a honeymoon. And you finally, you're getting to know each other, and you see the good side and the bad, and you're starting to analyze all this stuff. And you realize that, there's just some parts about it you really don't like. Well, you got to take it all or leave it,
I'm going to mention a few people's names and tell me what you can remember about them.
Okay.
We have Ernie Reschke, who is the assessor.
Yes.
And then engineer James Stevens and DPW director Richard Graham.
I remember Richard Graham, and I liked Richard, and I liked Ernie Reschke. They were both good professional people. They were absolutely top-notch, so there's no doubt about it. The middle one, I can't recall him.
James Stevens, I don't know.
I guess I do remember James Stevens, but I don't recall him that well. But Ernie was a good guy. He was an everyday guy. You could go and have a beer with him if you wanted to. And Dick was the same way. Dick was a little bit more proper. Dick was strictly business, and I admired that about him. He was a good guy, and he was there when Paul was dying, and having his and having difficulties, and he was there when all the problems were going on with these developers and these underground contractors, and the roads costs were going up and all this other stuff, and he was taking a lot of my heat It wasn't personal. I was talking about issues, but he was taking a lot of my heat, and he was doing his best to control and keep his department under, keep it together and get down to the bottom of some of this stuff. So yes, I admire both of those guys. Yeah, they were good guys, and they did their job. They did a good job. Yeah. So.
What are important qualities you think a council person should have?
Well, I think you have to be pragmatic. I think you have to be able to separate the trifle from the important. There's a lot of things that come before the council members that, you really really can't do much about. And you have to be able to separate those things. And you have to know which are really important and which are not. To gravel over issues that are really cannot be solved is just a waste of time. And it puts the city manager and his staff on a track that is just wasting their time as well. So you have to think about this. You have to be pretty pragmatic. I think the other thing you need to have is the ability to understand the ramifications of the decisions and choices you make as a city commissioner. If you're passing laws, if you're making changes to policies, if you're going to propose something, you have to know that you're going somewhere with it. And also understand that, hey, in the end, it may not be what you want. You have to try to reach out beyond the gratification of getting it passed and be able to say, well, I got that done, and now that's it. It isn't it. It's the beginning. That's just the beginning. The end is when it's over with. If you create a city where you give the developers their head and just tell them to do whatever they want, in the end you're going to have exactly what they gave you. You have nothing probably except a city that has just a lot of stuff in it. On the other hand, if you are creative, if you think about where you want to be, you look at things a little differently. You'll say, now look at Walmart, you want to come in here? Okay, we want tile roofs. We want a facade, we want trees in here that are going to grow, and lots of room for grass, and this and that. Kresge's, you want to come in here? Okay, we want trees around your building, we want a nice walking paths and things like this. We want enough parking, and that's the other thing we did too. We passed laws where we required enough parking so people could actually park in these buildings they were visiting. And a lot of communities, you got a building there and you can't even find a place to park.
Right.
And a lot of the developers said, hey, you're taking valuable land. What are you talking about here? You're building a building that's going to occupy 200 offices, and what are you going to have parking for 50? Mm-hmm. Tell me. Now, what's the sense in that? So, so anyway, that's the thing. You really have to be thoughtful about what you're doing and try to really reach out and look ahead to where this is all going to end.
Tell me about your wife Agnes and how many years you've been married.
Well, we'll be married 52 years in June on the 6th. Yes, wow. Yeah, we got married in 1955. I was in the Navy at the time, and she was living in MacArthur, Ohio, where she grew up. It's a little town in the southeastern part of the state that if you flew over it, you wouldn't even see it. It's just nothing but trees. And I met her the prior 1954. I was just before I went aboard ship. I was stationed with a fellow from her hometown that asked me to come with him one weekend. He wanted to introduce me to somebody he thought I would like, and I was probably 19 at the time. And we both kind of fell in love with each other, the first love at first sight, if you believe that. It was funny. She was looking at me and turning her head away, and I was looking at her and turning my head away. A couple of kids, and we rode each other while I was in the service, and then when I got back from overseas, got off the Midway, we got married. Yeah, moved out to California, and then we moved back to Ohio, where we had our first child, and then our second. And then we moved to Minnesota, then we moved to Michigan, and then we moved to Texas, and then we moved to Indiana, and then we moved to Oklahoma and back to Texas. Wow. So we've had many moves over the years. Yeah, yeah. They've all been interesting. Met a lot of good friends. So.
How many children and grandchildren do you have?
Let's see. I've got 4 children. We had girl, boy, The oldest is Cindy. She's 50. She's a trauma nurse at a Clinton Regional Hospital up in Oklahoma, in Clinton, Oklahoma. It's a regional hospital, and she is married to an engineer for the Southwest Bell, SBC, I guess they call them. And they have 2 boys, and those boys are married, and they're both in the building business. They rough in homes, or they rough in homes, and they have each a child, and one's a boy and one's a girl. So we have 2 great-grandchildren, a boy and a girl, and then we have 2 great-grandchildren that are prior to their earlier wives, earlier marriages, and so they have 2 children each. Then there's Cindy, then there's Johnny, who works for GM. He's at the Arlington Assembly Plant in Arlington, Texas, and he's in the paint lab. And he's married to Whitney, his wife, who is kind of a Celtic redhead. And they have a daughter that's Kelly, and she's starting college this year. She's going to be a nurse, and just finished high school. And then she has 2 children from her prior marriage, and Johnny raised those kids. And one's in the Navy, and the other one works for UPS. And the Navy one has a family, and so we've got great-grandchildren on that side, even though they're step-great-grandchildren. And then there's Jennifer, who is she's an artist. She designed her own line of jewelry. She has a husband who is in ultrasound. He has his own business, and they're doing very well on it. And they have 2 girls, and one of them, like I say, was just accepted to Harvard, and the other one is still in high school. And so we're not sure she's going to actually go there, because she's thinking about it, but she's been accepted, and along with several other colleges. She likes the graphic arts.
Okay.
And she's also, her name is Claire, and she's also very culinary. She loves to cook, and the family they love to cook. So we're not sure what's going to happen there. But whatever she does, I'm sure she'll be good at it. And so they have 2 children. And Jennifer was, when she finished college, she went back to school and took jewelry design there at the University of North Texas. We've got 2 colleges in the town of Denton, University of North Texas and Texas Women's University. TWU, Texas Women's University, is a school of medical center. And they teach nursing and physical therapy and all these other things. Whereas the University of North Texas is one of the finest music schools in the country. And it also has a graphic arts program and engineering school as well. So that's Jenny's kids. But Jennifer designed her own line of jewelry, had 2 reps, and was the Artist of the Month, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, at the Chicago Museum of Modern Art. Yeah, they loved her work, and it was very unusual, kind of a combination of Aztec and modern. Very beautiful jewelry she developed. But she doesn't do that. She's basically raising her girls and taking them to tennis and doing different things. And then the final boy, that's Paul. He's 40 years old now. He's in California. He lives in the town of Occidental. And he's my hippie. And his wife is somewhat of a hippie too. They've got 2 lovely kids, and he's a chef and also a baker, a first-class baker. And his wife is an artist, and they live out there, and they just have a pretty good life. They don't own much. They never buy anything that's new. They get by on so little that it just amazes me that they get by. And I worried about them when they first got married. And after 10 years of marriage and seeing how they're doing, I thought to myself, what am I worried about? He's lived half of his life the way he wants to. He can do as he dang well pleases. And he's happy besides, and they're both happy. Their children are smart as a whip because they spend a lot of time with him. He works when he wants to, and when he doesn't work. And it's kind of a nice life, isn't it?
After not having lived here for a while, what's your impression of Troy when you returned?
Oh, I was just absolutely thrilled with what they've done, really. I loved 16 Mile Road, and I saw the streets, all good highways going through the city, and the fact that there was no strip zoning except on the area where we stopped it on the south of 17 Mile Road. I'm amazed at the new offices and the world-class offices that have moved here. and become a part of this community and have invested here. The mall there, Sam Frankel's Mall on the north side, I think he did a good job, and that's a marvelous thing. And really, I think it's a great community.